In this video, we'll explore the haunting stories of the 10 oldest women ever executed in the United States. We'll walk through the crimes that put them on death row, the final words they spoke, and the last meals they requested before facing their fate. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and let's begin with the oldest, Betty Lou Beets. Betty Lou Beets. On February 24, 2000, Betty Lou Beets became the oldest woman executed in modern U.S. history, at age 62. Her life, marked by tragedy and violence, began in a poverty-stricken home in North Carolina, plagued by deafness and childhood abuse. By her teens, she'd already experienced the first of 5 marriages, each marked by instability and often violence. But it was the murder of her 5th husband, Jimmy Don Beets, that sealed her fate. Jimmy Don vanished in 1983. His disappearance originally explained away as a tragic fishing accident. But years later, authorities found his body and the remains of Betty Lou's 4th husband buried in her yard beneath a makeshift wishing well. Both men had been shot. During her trial, prosecutors depicted Betty Lou as a black widow who murdered for personal gain and the freedom to move on from men she claimed abused her. Her defense team argued that she had endured years of violence herself and that her actions were born out of fear and desperation. Decades on death row could not erase the past. As her execution date loomed, supporters petitioned for clemency, pointing to her mental health and traumatic history. But on that February night, Betty Lou walked into the death chamber at the Huntsville prison, Texas, stoic and silent. Her last meal, a traditional Texas prison meal, went mostly untouched. Asked for her final words, Betty Lou declined, choosing to leave the world in silence. As the lethal injection took hold, she looked up one last time, her eyes betraying no emotion. Betty Lou Beets was pronounced dead at 6:18 p.m., her legacy forever tied to the dark secrets she took to her grave. Hers is a story that leaves us with more questions than answers. Lois Nadian Smith. Next on our list is Lois Nadian Smith, executed in Oklahoma on December 4, 2001, at the age of 61. Her life and her crime were as complicated as they were chilling. Lois was a grandmother, known for her sharp wit and stubborn resolve. But behind closed doors, she harbored deep resentment and a capacity for violence. In 1982, a heated argument with her son's ex-girlfriend Cindy Bailey escalated beyond control. Lois, feeling betrayed by Cindy over a series of accusations involving drugs and her son's well-being, invited the younger woman to her home under the guise of reconciliation. Instead, Lois lured Cindy to a remote spot, confronted her with a gun, and, driven by rage, shot her multiple times. But she didn't stop there. Lois forced Cindy to dig her own grave before delivering the fatal shot. The murder was shocking, not only for its brutality but for the calculated way Lois covered up the crime, hiding Cindy's body and misleading investigators. When authorities finally uncovered the truth, the trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Lois Nadian Smith was sentenced to death, her appeals spanning nearly 2 decades. On the day of her execution, the woman who had once controlled every detail now had no control at all. Lois declined a special last meal and offered no final words. As the curtain opened in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary's death chamber, Lois glanced at the witnesses, her face expressionless. The drugs flowed, and within moments her life ended. The silence in the chamber was deafening, a stark contrast to the rage that defined her final act. Lois Nadian Smith's story is a reminder of how quickly anger and pain can lead to irreversible tragedy. Suzanne Margaret Basso. Suzanne Basso's story is one of greed, manipulation, and stunning cruelty. Executed in Texas on February 5, 2014, at age 59, she left behind a case that shocked even seasoned investigators. Suzanne wasn't a career criminal. She was a mother, and, at times, described as charismatic. But beneath her charm was a darkness that would ultimately lead her to death row. In 1998, she and a group of accomplices targeted Louis Buddy Musso, a trusting, mentally disabled man, luring him with promises of love and family. Suzanne's real motive? Life insurance money. Over several days, Buddy was subjected to unimaginable abuse. He was beaten, burned, and tortured, forced to bathe in bleach, and denied food. When he could no longer stand, Suzanne and her group delivered the final blow, leaving his body in a ditch. The autopsy revealed over 50 injuries, a testament to the horror he endured. Police quickly connected Suzanne to the crime. Her trial captivated Texas, with graphic evidence and testimony revealing the full extent of Buddy's suffering. Suzanne's defense argued mental illness and claimed she was manipulated by her co-defendants, but the jury saw through it. On execution day, Suzanne was calm, refusing a last meal and declining to address the witnesses. As the drugs entered her system, she mouthed a prayer, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Within moments, it was over. Suzanne Basso became one of the oldest women ever executed in the state, her legacy forever defined by the cruelty she inflicted on a defenseless man. Her story remains a chilling warning of what unchecked manipulation and greed can do. Judy Buenoano. Judy Buenoano, also known as the Black Widow, was executed on March 30, 1998, at age 54, the first woman put to death in Florida in 150 years. Judy's crimes were as shocking as they were calculated. Over the years, she was linked to the deaths of her husband, her disabled son, and her fiancé. Each time, the motive was the same: insurance money and the promise of a fresh start. Her victims trusted her, never suspecting that the woman they loved was planning their demise. Her most notorious crime was the murder of her husband, James Goodyear, whom she poisoned slowly with arsenic, then collected his life insurance. Years later, she turned her attention to her son, Michael. After poisoning him for months, she took him canoeing and watched as he drowned, unable to move due to the effects of the poison. Police grew suspicious when her fiancé also died under unusual circumstances. Eventually, Judy's string of crimes unraveled. She was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. The public watched in morbid fascination as details emerged about her cold, methodical approach to murder. On the morning of her execution, Judy declined a special last meal and wore a black dress. She refused to make a final statement, maintaining her composure to the very end. When the electric current surged through the chair, the room was silent except for the hum of machinery. Judy Buenoano's execution marked the end of one of the most infamous killing sprees by a woman in U.S. history, a chilling reminder of the dangers hidden beneath a trusted face. Linda Lyon Block. Linda Lyon Block was executed in Alabama on May 10, 2002, at the age of 54. Her journey to death row began with radical beliefs and ended in a fatal confrontation with law enforcement. Linda, a vocal anti-government activist, spent years denouncing federal authority and preaching sovereignty. But on October 4, 1993, her ideology turned deadly. When a police officer approached Linda and her common-law husband, George Sibley, in a Walmart parking lot, a routine encounter escalated into violence. Fearing arrest and loss of freedom, Linda and Sibley opened fire. Officer Roger Motley was killed in the shootout, and Linda was quickly captured. During her trial, Linda was unrepentant, refusing to recognize the court's authority. Her defense centered on her anti-government beliefs, but the jury was unmoved. The murder of a police officer carried the ultimate penalty. Linda spent years appealing her conviction, claiming her actions were justified. But on execution day, she was composed, refusing a special meal and declining to speak. As the electric current surged, witnesses watched as the woman who once railed against the government faced its ultimate power. Linda Lionblock's case is a stark reminder of how extreme beliefs can spiral into deadly violence. Her final moments were marked by silence and the cold glow of the electric chair, a dramatic end to a life defined by conflict. Kimberly McCarthy. Kimberly McCarthy's life was a study in contrasts, once a nurse, later a convicted murderer. On June 26, 2013, at age 52, she became the 500th person executed in Texas since 1976. Kimberly's descent began with addiction. Drugs took over her life, pushing her into a world of crime and desperation. In 1997, she targeted her 71-year-old neighbor, Dorothy Booth, a retired college professor. Kimberly forced her way inside Dorothy's home, stabbed her multiple times, and stole her credit cards and wedding ring. She later used Dorothy's possessions to buy drugs. The brutality of the crime shocked the Dallas community. Kimberly was arrested within days, and the evidence against her was overwhelming. At trial, she showed little remorse, but later, as years passed on death row, she expressed regret for her actions. On the day of her execution, Kimberly's composure surprised even the guards. Her last meal was a simple tray of prison food. Her final words reflected her faith and hope for forgiveness. "This is not a loss. This is a win. You know where I'm going. I'm going home to be with Jesus. Keep the faith. I love you all." As the lethal drugs took hold, Kimberly McCarthy closed her eyes, leaving behind a legacy of addiction, regret, and violence, a reminder of how far one can fall. Lisa Montgomery. Lisa Montgomery's case is one of the most disturbing and tragic in recent U.S. history. Executed on January 13, 2021 at age 52, Lisa's story began in a world of trauma. Born into a family marked by abuse, Lisa suffered unimaginable violence throughout her childhood. By adulthood, her mental health was shattered. In December 2004, Lisa drove from Kansas to Missouri, lured a pregnant woman named Bobby Jo Stinnett into trusting her, then strangled her, and cut her unborn baby from her womb. Lisa kidnapped the baby and tried to pass the child off as her own. The crime horrified the nation. Lisa was arrested the next day, the baby miraculously rescued. At trial, her defense argued she was severely mentally ill, suffering from PTSD and psychosis after a lifetime of abuse. The prosecution, however, saw her as a cunning murderer. Lisa spent 13 years on death row. On execution night, she ate a chicken sandwich, chips, and water. When asked for her final words, Lisa said simply, "No." At 1:31 a.m., the drugs began to flow, and Lisa Montgomery's life ended quietly. Her execution remains controversial, with many arguing her severe mental illness should have spared her from death. Lisa's story is a harrowing reminder of how cycles of trauma can spiral into violence. Velma Barfield. Velma Barfield was executed on November 2, 1984, at age 52, the first woman put to death in the U.S. after the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. Her story began in a small North Carolina town, where a troubled childhood gave way to a life marked by addiction and loss. Velma was a caretaker by profession, but her kindness hid a terrible secret. Over several years, she poisoned at least 6 people, including her mother, boyfriends, and her fiancé, Stuart Taylor. Each time, Velma used arsenic, then comforted her victims as they died. Her crimes were uncovered after Stuart Taylor's suspicious death. An autopsy revealed arsenic poisoning, leading to Velma's arrest. She quickly confessed to multiple murders, claiming she acted under the influence of drugs and depression. During her years on death row, Velma became a born-again Christian, counseling other inmates and earning the nickname Death Row Granny. Appeals for clemency flooded in, but on execution night, Velma remained calm. She declined a special meal, choosing instead to pray with her spiritual advisor. When asked for her final words, Velma expressed love and forgiveness, hoping her story might inspire others to change. At 2:15 a.m., the lethal injection was administered. Velma Barfield's legacy is a complex one: a killer, a counselor, and a cautionary tale about the dangers of addiction and unchecked despair. Kelly Gissendaner. Kelly Gissendaner's path to the execution chamber began with a toxic marriage and a deadly plan. On September 30th, 2015, at age 47, Kelly became the only woman executed in Georgia in over 70 years. In 1997, Kelly orchestrated the murder of her husband, Douglas Gissendaner, convincing her lover to carry out the killing while she created an alibi. Prosecutors described her as the mastermind, arguing she manipulated her lover and plotted every detail. At trial, Kelly's remorse was clear. She broke down, apologizing to her children and the victim's family. During her 18 years on death row, Kelly transformed. She became a minister, counseled fellow inmates, and inspired many with her story of redemption. Appeals for clemency were supported by faith leaders and her own children, who forgave her. But the state pressed forward. On her final day, Kelly sang "Amazing Grace" as she was led to the death chamber. Her last words were filled with love and gratitude. "Bless you all. Tell my children that I love them and I'm proud of them." As the drugs entered her system, witnesses reported a sense of peace in the room. Kelly Gissendaner's execution sparked debate about mercy, justice, and the possibility of redemption, even for those who have committed the gravest of crimes. Aileen Wuornos. Aileen Wuornos is perhaps the most infamous woman on this list, a serial killer whose life and death became the subject of documentaries and movies. Executed in Florida on October 9, 2002, at age 46, her story is both tragic and terrifying. Aileen's life was a cycle of abuse, homelessness, and survival on the margins. From a young age, she suffered relentless trauma, abandoned by her parents, abused by her grandfather, and forced into sex work as a teenager. Between 1989 and 1990, Aileen killed 7 men in Florida, claiming each was an act of self-defense against sexual assault. The state saw her as a predator. She claimed she was fighting for her life. Her trial was a media sensation, with Aileen herself often lashing out at the press and court. Diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and possibly psychosis, her mental state was always in question. On execution day, Aileen declined a last meal, opting for a simple cup of coffee. Her final words were as cryptic as her life. "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all. I'll be back." At 9:47 a.m., the lethal injection ended her troubled life. Aileen Wuornos' story remains one of the most controversial and haunting in American history. These are the stories of the 10 oldest women ever executed in U.S. history. Each case is a study in tragedy, violence, and the complexities of the human spirit. Let us know in the comments which case shocked you the most, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories.